Welcome to MJ Hobby Corner, guys. This is the MJ Hobby Corner office. In this video today, I want to show you guys how I'm making a game mat, a new game mat that I'll be using in my games. And this is specifically for 5 leagues from the Borderlands because I'm trying to get a game in this week. This build is very fast. It took me about 3 hours to make, and most of that was waiting for things to dry. So why don't we head over to the studio and I'll show you step by step how I made this mat, and then you'll see some different terrain setups with specialized terrain that I make specifically for these mats. So let's go check it out. So really quickly, these are the materials that I needed to make the mat. I use mostly apple barrel paints or folk art paints. I got these at Walmart. They're very, very cheap. I use some hot glue, scissors, and also a toothbrush, an old toothbrush for stippling. And these are some cheap spray paints. So first things first, I'm going to work on the edges of a pool. So I cut a hole in my cloth, and now I take my hot glue gun and just basically texture the edges of the pool. This also glues the cloth together because I folded the cloth. It was very big. So this technique with the hot glue gun is something I learned from DM Scotty from watching his videos, and I've been using it for quite a long time now. He shows a lot of ways of texturing with the hot glue gun. So now I take some brown spray paint after I've added some hot glue to the mat itself. Just added a few regions of like rocks and stuff. And then I take my brown spray paint and I spray the edges of the pool. And that's what you're seeing here. And then I take that brown spray paint and just go ahead and add a few globs on all of the little areas with hot glue. These are going to be like little raised areas of rock, which I'll paint later in grays and browns. So now the big thing is to add the vegetation patches. And I do that with other pieces of cloth, of old towels and felt, and I simply hot glue them to the mat. Now for the towels, these were white towels that I cut up. They were very old, and then I let them soak in green paint for 24 hours. And this kind of cloth method makes some really interesting flexible terrain, as you can see here. And this becomes very important later when I set up the board. So I keep adding my vegetation patches, and again, these are old bits of towel and felt that I have. The towel is very good because it's nicely textured, so you can actually give it a little bit of spray paint after, and it looks really good once it's all spray painted. And I add the felt just to give like it's a different kind of vegetation, right? Now these areas can be used to like show different patches of forest. So I start painting my little raised rocky areas with some gray, and later I will highlight. I like to stipple these areas with the paint rather than just like painting, and it gives it a nice rough texture. So now I want to add some roads or game trails, right? Some dirt roads. So I take some gray paint, and basically what I'm doing here is just painting my roads with gray paint, and then I go back and I highlight a little bit with some tans and other colors. Mostly gray, light gray, and tans. So now that the board has, the mat is drying up, I have to let it dry before I continue to the next step. I have to make sure everything is dry. So now for the pond, once everything is dry, I cut up a piece of plastic. I like using these plastic bags, and I just cut them open. This was a really big one. And basically I mark around the shape of the pond, right? And I give myself plenty of area between the edges of the pond and the edges that are going to be glued. This is going to be glued underneath the mat with hot glue. Okay, so I cut my shape of pond, and you see that it's a lot wider than the actual pond. And that's because I'm going to glue everything now with hot glue, okay? So I'm just putting it over the plastic area, and I really just love the way this looks when light reflects off it. It really does kind of look like water. So then I get my toothbrush and I start to highlight all the vegetation areas with a really bright green from apple barrel. It's like a spring green or something. And I just make sure I highlight all of those towel areas and, you know, the little towels that I use and everything, my patches of vegetation. So then I take my hot glue on low and I very carefully hot glue the edges of the pond and slowly begin to glue the plastic to the underneath the mat. So again, this is the showing you how I glue that plastic to the underside of the mat for the pond. Okay, and there it is. It's all glued up, and you know, it's really cool. But there's one more step that I do. This pond thing is very modular. You'll see what I mean in just a minute. So my terrain in cases like this is very specialized. This was just a waterfall. You're going to see how I use this. If you've seen my Oathmark games in the past, you'll see these things in use. Okay, so this is the mat. It's basically complete. I'm just giving it some time to dry. And right now the pond has no color, right? Because the table's reflecting. But then I put a nice bit of tablecloth, blue tablecloth, and this is a very cheap cloth that's like leathery, right? It's like a plastic cloth I got at the dollar store. And the cool thing is that that's not glued. I can take that off and add whatever color bottom to my pond that I want, because that's completely modular. I'm just doing that to give me a little bit of blue, a little bit of color. Okay, so then I begin to add terrain to experiment with the mat. And I added a couple of pieces of styrofoam to make some hills underneath the mat. That's a very old school method. And you could see the flexible terrain, how it flexes with the hills. Okay, and you can see the rocks there in the background. They flex so that it can kind of take the shape of the hill. And that really helps to decorate the hills a little bit so they're not always like plain. And there's a little well, an old barn house. And there you can see a little picture of the board as I set it up. And again, this is just to experiment to see, you know, how many different setups I can come up with. So now I'm going to do another setup. Now this one is interesting. This is with my fold river. You can see my folding river here. I've already used this in many games, and it's about 2 years old. Okay, and I start adding my flexible terrain to form my banks and to cover up, you know, some of the felt and stuff. So any little holes fill up with scatter terrain basically. So that's what I'm doing now, and this is another setup, and you can see how the waterfall is set up there in the back, and there are books that make that big hill there for the waterfall. That's why I created the waterfall like that. Now to adorn the base of that hill, I made some specialized edge terrain that I can just stick right on there. Now this terrain does have little Velcro bits underneath it, and if I'm using like felt, it really sticks onto the felt, so it's very cool. Okay, now very important, and I didn't show this, but the mat is secured to the table using alligator clips. That's very important. I'll probably show a picture of the alligator clips in the back, but basically there's like 4 alligator clips and they hold that cloth down. And creepy trees. We gotta have some creepy tree. Yeah, there you go. So basically this whole waterfall thing was formed in just a few minutes, and I just keep adding terrain here and there to you know, just experiment with it and see how many different setups I can come up with. And with this particular, I did about 5. Oh, and here is some clip-on terrain. This is also very important. Clip-on terrain gets clipped right to the edge of the hill, and that's with a clothespin. These are the kinds of clip-on terrain that for my coral reefs, and there's no reason why I can't use the coral reef clip-on terrain for like alien-looking plants or something, right? Even in a fantasy world, we don't always have to have maples and pines. So I add a very rough bridge, and here are some figures on the bridge. I add a bridge to give a little more flavor to the whole river. Okay, and all this is on this mat that I created today. So here's the, again, the setup without the, and it's really cool. I mean, just, you know, it's so modular and I can do so much with it. I can really make quite a variety of setups. This is one of my favorites. This is the other side of the riverbank. And those rocks are made with like little foam bits. The really soft, like cushiony foam. And once I'm done, I mean, I take my river off, take all the terrain off, and the river is folded up and put in a bin. I also make folding ponds and other things, which I can show in a future video. But the table is now back to the original setup that I started with. And everything is dry on the mat, so it's pretty cool. So not a bad setup. This one just has the little pool and more areas of like dry land. Once I take everything off, here is the mat all finished, and I just fold it up and put it in a bin. Imagine these setups all at night with my new light effects. That's going to be really cool. I bet you that waterfall look really cool. So I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. It's a lot of fun making these mats, and if you guys are interested in the future, we can talk about other environments. I've made mats for Arctic environments, for underground environments, for desert environments, even swamps. There's a lot of different ways to use this technique and even make larger mats. And this is a very, like I said, very low budget, kind of quick and dirty kind of thing. Very low budget thing so that we can play some games and it still looks decent, but it does have a little bit of a system to it because I do make scatter terrain and other pieces of terrain that are specialized for adorning this old school method of putting books under the cloth, right? So anyway, we will see other videos like this in the future, and now it's time for me to study some 5 Leagues from the Borderlands because I would like to have at least an encounter game, right? If not the campaign, and we can start a campaign in the near future. Okay, so 5 Leagues from the Borderland this week, solo game with my new map. Have a good day, folks, and I hope that you really enjoyed this. We'll talk very soon. Hit like and subscribe if you like what you see. All right, folks. See you on the next low budget project.